So boundaries, right? That's what today's about. And this is not just an ADHD thing; it's an everyone thing. And there's some elements to that that also we can be affected by a little more so, or it can be a common theme. So the first thing I want to ask is, why do you think I chose boundaries like right before the holidays? You can type in the chat, like, why boundaries? Why is this good? Because everybody's about to see their family, right? Yeah, reminder, refresher, totally. Have a hard time saying no. Yeah, we're some very nice people. And when we're coming through to the holidays, one, there's going to be a lot of opportunities to set boundaries because one, we're around family, and that's sometimes some of the hardest people to set boundaries around, especially if you have a big family that doesn't set boundaries. If you're in that camp or just doesn't know how, and it can almost be against the grain if there's old patterns. Also, we're going to be like taking time off of work, right? And we're going to need to set boundaries because out of any time in the year, this is the time people understand that you might be taking time off, right? This is the season to take a break when you're a real estate agent. There's really not another time in the year where people don't expect as much than there is now, right? So that's why this is really important because you get a break, just like nature. Nature rests in the winter. You deserve to rest a little bit. Nature doesn't just go all out and bloom every day, 24/7. Like you get to have some rest. I mean, bears hibernate. So setting boundaries is really helpful. And then also like setting boundaries with yourself. What we're going to talk about today is like how to set boundaries, how to know that you might need to work on your boundaries. Also, like the types of boundaries you can set, and some of that's like with yourself as well. So when we're looking at the holidays, you might have some boundaries for yourself that you want to maintain. So boundaries could be in relationships, with family, with yourself, with your clients. There's a lot of different aspects of boundaries, and that's why it's really important. So what I want to show you first, like I said, we're going to get more. I'm going to work to get more and more visuals because one person brought that up, and I thought that was really smart. So I've got a visual here of the different types of boundaries. And so for the agenda today, just so you know, we're going to talk about the different types of boundaries, what healthy and unhealthy boundaries, unhealthy and healthy boundaries chart, because you might see some stuff on there that says, okay, I need to maybe work on this a little bit more. Also a pattern, because I have a mental health background. I'm not licensed right now, but a pattern that can happen when you start setting boundaries with people around you, especially like your closest relationships, and what that pattern can look like, and when a lot of people stop, and what happens if you keep going. Some benefits of setting boundaries, and then like boundaries versus demands. So we're gonna really go deep in this, and I mean, with a mental health background, this is really fun, And again, I'm not like a therapist, right? And so these are from experts. These things I pulled, and so this is just a fun call to revisit this. So first thing, let's look at the different types of boundaries. Right, I'm going to do a screen share here. Okay, we've got all kinds of different types, right? So we have intellectual boundaries. So this is if you've had that, if you have, I mean, my uncles are great. So the examples I'm giving are not my family. But let's say you had an uncle that just keeps talking about politics, let's say, over and over and over again, right? And just won't stop. And you've asked him to stop. That would be an intellectual boundary, right? If you have somebody that just keeps talking about a certain topic that makes you uncomfortable, or an opinion or thoughts, and just keeps bringing it up, that's an intellectual boundary. Emotional boundary. Let's say you have a different uncle, right? And these are not my uncles. My uncles don't do this. But let's say you have a different uncle that drank a bunch of beer and now is just, crying and spilling all these things all over you emotionally. That's just way too much, right? It's like it's too much for your nervous system. It's just so much more than you can handle, or they're making comment on your emotions, right? Or what you're doing or something. So oversharing could be that. Now, yes, with ADHD, we can overshare, but the violation of boundaries, there's different offenses, right? There's the one where you just don't read a social cue. That's very different. There's also people that recognize your boundary and don't care and keep going. That's a very different thing. So if you feel like you overshare because you miss social cues, you're not violating a boundary, I mean, maybe subconsciously a little bit, but that's very, very different than someone who sees the boundary and keeps going. Okay, so don't compare yourself to those two scenarios. Sexual boundaries, consent, right? In any way, shape, or form. That's what that is. Words, it could even be words with that. It doesn't have to just be physical. Time boundaries, right? If you say, hey, I'm gonna do this, I need you to kind of give me some space. I'm going to be working on this for an hour. Really need to focus, and they keep interrupting and they keep coming in over and over again. That's a time boundary. Material boundaries. If you're at the office and someone comes in and they eat your food, your lunch that you bring, or they keep using your coffee mug, or they keep using your printer ink or something, we say, hey, would you mind holding? And they just keep doing it. They're violating material boundaries. And then physical boundaries. If you just don't like touch, right? If you don't like hugs, if you don't want to sit close to somebody. Now, boundaries, not everybody has to like your boundaries or understand them to be boundaries. So I want to make that clear. You might be someone, especially some people who are neurodivergent, don't like to be touched at certain times. They don't like hugs. They don't like it. They just do it because other people want to. You don't have to keep doing that and letting people hug you if you really don't like it. It's okay if people don't like your boundaries. That's okay. So I want to make that clear, that you might set a boundary and it might like make a relationship more tense. That doesn't mean it was a wrong thing to set a boundary. And we're going to talk about that. So again, these are the types. We have intellectual boundaries, emotional boundaries, sexual boundaries, time boundaries, material boundaries, and then physical boundaries. So those are the different types of boundaries. And we'll have a lot more visuals coming up here as well. When we're going to see family, because I think there's a good amount of people know that it's normal to regress a little bit. If you didn't know that, that's something that's common in mental health. Like when you go back around your family, you're going to regress a little bit. You might feel a little bit small in some families, not all. So that's really common that somebody has talked about. And then when you do set a boundary, and this is kind of the steps that I was talking about that I want to like what that might look like. Right. So I'm addressing families first because it's just a good example. Right. So what I want to say too and we'll talk about real estate too, with families, boundaries and having less boundaries can run in families, right? Because you don't have a model. So if your parents didn't have great boundaries with you, chances are their grandparents didn't have great boundaries, right? And your family might not have good boundaries. So you have an opportunity, if you're in a family that maybe doesn't have great boundaries, or in a situation or a friend group or anywhere, by you setting good boundaries, you can actually model that and teach them how to have good boundaries. And if it's within a family, you're essentially healing like generational trauma, right? You're modeling it and you're teaching people. So it might seem against the grain at first, but then it gets better. So I want to show you, and again, these can all kind of apply to different scenarios. So let's just look at what can happen when you set a boundary. So this can happen. So this is just a normal pattern, right? So you set a boundary for the first time, whether it's with your family, whether it's with a spouse, a partner, a friend, someone. And for some, right, if they don't know healthy boundaries, it could actually trigger abandonment. It might seem like abandonment because for us, it might seem selfish, right? Because with ADHD, we can be people pleasers. We really care about people who have deep empathy. We want to make sure people are comfortable. And so even more so, it can feel selfish for us and it feels terrifying to set a boundary. So we might set a boundary for the first time. And then if that other person hasn't experienced healthy boundaries, they might take it as abandonment. They might take it as you're being mean. They might call you selfish or think it's selfish because secretly they've never been taught it's okay, right? So when they tried to set a boundary as a kid, they were taught they were selfish. So now they repeat the same thing. So a lot of people right here, some people stop right here or don't even get to this point, right? Because then they're like, oh man, you're right, I'm being selfish, I'm sorry. And they stop, right? Some people stop here. And then most people stop here. So you set a boundary and they call you selfish, or there might be whatever, or just, create some tension. And then you maintain that boundary and then you get challenged, right? They might try to break your boundaries down because it feels like abandonment. It feels like life or death. So they might use guilt, they might use sympathy, they might use anger, and then you're going to calmly restate and respectfully hold your ground for boundaries. And then what's going to happen is they're going to realize like you're serious and they're going to get to a place of acceptance, or they might get emotionally abusive or worse, which again, I have here, you might want to remove yourself from the situation, right? So it's either going to be acceptance after you're really calmly, which we're going to go more into detail this. But if there's anyone that's afraid to set boundaries or feels uncomfortable, this is normally why. Because if you set a boundary and someone's like, "Oh, cool, thanks for telling me. Yeah, I'll come back in 2 hours." If you had that growing up, you're not gonna be scared of setting a boundary. You're gonna be like fine, and you're not even gonna be worried about it, right? So that's why I wanted to do this first, because a lot of people stop in these two, and then it's just this cycle, right? And you wait to build up, and you try to do it again, and then this happens, right? So you calmly and respectfully hold your ground, and then there's a place of acceptance, or it gets worse, and you want to remove yourself, and then there's the adoption on their end. So now they learn it's okay for them to have boundaries too, and then now that you've modeled it, and then they start to set them based on your example, and the dynamic gets healthier, right? This is you can if you have a relationship that's maybe not quite as healthy, you can actually improve that dynamic. You can make the boundaries healthier just by you focusing on your actions, right? So the relationship gets deeper because now you can actually speak up for what you want. You feel safer, you feel better. So this is kind of a cycle that can happen, right? Set a boundary, triggers abandonment issues. If they don't know healthy boundaries, they challenge you, you double down on your ground, then they accept it, then they actually model it, they have healthy boundaries, and things get better. So this is, if you can make it past this part, like number 3, and really hold your ground again, unless you're around an unhealthy person, you're probably going to get to a place of acceptance, and things are going to get better. But most people quit here, so just remember that. Don't quit, right? So that's just some steps like in mental health and stuff like that. Somebody said, "Oh, today's going to be a fun day." I know. I hope it's okay to start with the heavier stuff. There's other stuff that's just not that, but it's just people don't really talk about this much, and so I think it's good. So okay, let's talk about the benefits of healthy boundaries. Let's do that. Okay, so here's some benefits. You're gonna have more compassion because your cup isn't empty. Greater assertiveness when you need it. Your needs are gonna get met. You're gonna have less anger and resentment. Feeling of peace and safety. You're going to have time and energy to do the things that nourish and bring joy to you, your mind, your spirit, feeling respected by yourself and others. You're going to have less conflicts, improved communication, greater self-esteem, less anxiety and stress, increased confidence, and you're going to feel understood and accepted by your friends and family. You can really create if you're in certain relationships, which a lot of us have, some people that don't have great boundaries, you can really deepen and improve those relationships by setting boundaries, which it feels opposite sometimes because it's almost like if you're not used to setting boundaries, it feels like you're pushing them away, but actually you're deepening intimacy by being honest, right? Instead of this surface level kind of people pleaser stuff. So those are some of the benefits. And so I want to go to, let's see. So I want to talk to you about, where is this graph? I had this great graphic of, okay, here we go. So here's an example of maybe some things to tell you like, hey, maybe I could work on my boundaries. Okay. So this is a healthy versus unhealthy boundary chart. Now you're probably going to have some of the stuff on unhealthy boundaries. I still do. So don't think you got to be perfect. Oh gosh, like everyone's got this stuff. This isn't just an ADHD stuff. This is like an everybody thing. I mean, I've coached people who have ADHD who don't. Everybody's got boundary stuff. But usually there's always a way to improve, like always. So if you hear something on the unhealthy side, it doesn't mean, oh gosh, you're unhealthy, you have terrible boundaries. Okay. So here's an example of a healthy boundary, right? You can say no or yes, and you're okay with others saying no to you. Okay. So you can say yes or no, and you can tell the truth, and you're not scared about what the consequences are. Now, if you made a promise to somebody and it's this really big thing, and then you back out last minute, that's different. So again, I'm not talking about these like extreme situations where obviously you might want to handle it a little bit differently, but this is in general. If somebody says, hey, you want to go out this weekend, and normally you might say yes, even though you don't have any energy left because you've spent it all, and you are gonna really dysregulate your nervous system. You need to be able to say no and say, oh my gosh, I really want to spend time with you, and that's going to be too much for me. What's an activity we can do that's not around a ton of people that's too overstimulating for me right now, right? You need to be able to say that kind of stuff. And then if they really want it, then they would say, Oh, I hear that. I really want some social time. Would it be okay if I went out with my friends then on Saturday and we spent the day together on Saturday? Right? That's what that needs to. That's what that's supposed to look like. Not. Oh, you never want to go out with my friends, or you never do what I want. Right? That's not what we're talking about. Right? So here you can't say no because you're afraid of rejection or abandonment. That's unhealthy. Healthy boundaries. You have a strong sense of identity. You respect yourself. Unhealthy boundaries. Your identity consists of what you think others want you to be. You're a chameleon. I think a lot of us is, if you're masking your symptoms, and again, we're going to have some of this naturally because we need to mask our symptoms in some, our traits, right? In some scenarios. So you can be a little bit of a chameleon with still having healthy boundaries. It's just, is your full identity of what others want you to be. Healthy boundaries. You expect reciprocity in a relationship. You share responsibility and power. Unhealthy. You have no balance of power, responsibility in your relationships. You tend to either overly responsible. I know there's a lot of us who've done that, or in controlling, or passive and dependent. Right? You don't do anything. You just kind of go with. They make all the decisions. Or overly responsible. You do everything. You take over everything. Now, the only caveat to this is if both parties feel good in that. You might have one person who is more dominant and the other person's just more passive, and that's how they are, and they like not having to make decisions. That's different than you not being able to make any decisions for yourself, right? So don't take these as like all or nothing, right? There's a nuance to this. This is healthy. You know when the problem is yours and when it belongs to somebody else. Unhealthy boundaries, and this was me my whole life. You take on other people's problems as your own. You think it's your fault, right? Or you try to fix others' problems. Hey, Tyler, I've done that a lot. So that's an unhealthy boundary, right? It is healthy to say, ooh, this was my part. This was not. This was their part. It's not blaming. It's logic, right? You're just explaining it. Healthy, you share personal information gradually in a mutual sharing, trusting relationship. Unhealthy, you share personal information way too soon before establishing mutual trust and sharing. So again, this is consent based. With ADHD and neurodivergence, we don't like, who here likes small talk? Like not any of us, right? Who likes to do small? We go straight to the meat of stuff and we get deep fast. And so our line of boundary with that is going to be a little bit more nuanced than someone else. I'll give you an example of what was a healthy boundary, but going deep really fast. So last night I was at a park, and there was a woman with her son and then his stepdad. And we hadn't talked a lot. We've kind of been around each other. And she shared with me that it was like they'd been together a couple of years, and she was glad that they got along. And then there was a little nervousness about like dating again. And I told her how I guess I'll share, but that my mom didn't date ever, and so I had to look outward for models of relationships because I didn't see that, and how cool it was that was in their home, that their son got to see a healthy relationship and get that example. And then right, so I shared immediately that I didn't have a dad around, but there was consent because she said, "Oh my gosh, thank you! Like I never thought of it like that. I felt bad for dating again." So it was a share, but it was something that was helpful, and it wasn't like all over the place and me going on for 10 or 15 minutes trying to get emotional support, right? Does that make sense? So it's okay to share deep quickly if it's appropriate for the situation and both parties have consent and it feels right. Okay. So healthy boundaries, you don't tolerate any form of abuse or disrespect. Unhealthy boundaries, you have a high tolerance for abuse and being treated with disrespect. So you're not standing up for yourself. You're making excuses for why they acted like that. Oh, I know why they did that. They've got trauma or whatever, instead of like, hey, I know you have trauma and that's not okay. Healthy, you know your own wants, needs, and feelings. You communicate them clearly. Unhealthy, your wants, needs, and feelings are secondary to others and sometimes determined by others. Anybody relate to that? I have. So that's an important one, is that you're speaking up for your needs while taking into consideration of others. Healthy, you're committed to and responsible for exploring, nurturing your full potential. Unhealthy, you ignore your inner voice and instinct and allow others' expectations to define your potential. So if you've ever been in a relationship or a situation where you numb this out and you start to doubt it, and you think maybe that's not right, maybe I'm over exaggerating, like that's a good one. If that inner voice starts quiet, red flag should go up. Healthy, you're responsible for your own happiness and fulfillment. You allow others to be responsible for their own happiness and fulfillment. Unhealthy, you feel responsible for others' happiness and fulfillment and sometimes rely on your relationships to create that for you. So a healthy relationship is two whole people coming together, right? And they're better, but they're still two individuals coming together versus we are one, we feel this way, we want this, right? That's enmeshment. Healthy, you value your opinions, instincts, and feelings as much as or more than other people's opinions and feelings. So you are number one. Who's been taught that that's selfish before? I've been called, especially if you're neurodivergent, we've been called selfish before, a lot of us, because I know for me, I had autism and I wanted the lights turned down low and I wanted certain music on or not on. I wanted to do things I wanted to because nothing else produced dopamine. And so I would feel sick, right? So, especially for us, and we talked about 20,000 negative messages by the age of 8, if you have ADHD, we've been told, why are you only thinking about yourself? Why are you selfish? Why you just want to do what you want to do? Those things. And so, even more so, like, I don't know about you, but there's this overcompensation that I've done where I don't want to be selfish. Let me be like selfless because I'm selfish. So I need to course correct when really I wasn't selfish at all. I just had freaking autism. You know what I mean? Or like ADHD. And I just needed to do specific things to regulate my nervous system. I couldn't go do that thing everybody wanted to do because I had to go inside and calm down the stimulus, you know, or I was so excited about something and so locked on, I couldn't, the hyper focus, I couldn't do anything else. So I don't want to watch this movie about something I don't care about because I'm going to sit there and fidget and it's going to drive me nuts. I want to watch a movie about my special interest because I'm so excited about it. So if you don't have ADHD, it can look like selfishness. And so it's easy, I think, and people I've coached to try to overcompensate for that the other way. But then we completely abandon ourselves thinking we're, compensating for being selfish when we're really not. Healthy, you know and respect your limits emotionally and physically. You allow others to define their own limits. So unhealthy, you allow others to define your limits in order to please them, or you try to define limits for others. And so this might look like you pushing yourself in a class that you've been there all day and the lights are too bright and you feel like you're having panic attacks and you don't want to leave because you don't want people to see that you're leaving or that you didn't follow it or you're weak or a limiting belief or something like that. You might need to leave. You might need to go home. You might have hit your limit 5 hours before other people do, but that's okay because there's going to be a consequence if you don't pause and go collect yourself or re-regulate. So again, that can come with masking too. We might push ourselves way harder past our limits to feel normal, right? The status quo. Healthy boundaries, you're able to ask for help when you need it. I made one of our Monday memes is about that. Unhealthy, you feel it, asking for help is a sign of weakness or you avoid it. So that's something we can be very independent as well. We don't ask for help. Again, it's not everybody, but it's pretty common with our demographic is that we're also very capable and we can do stuff really fast, or we don't know how to help, how to ask for help because we're in a state of overwhelmed a lot. So we don't know what is a time to ask for help or what's just normal that we just need to deal with. And then the last one, you don't compromise your values and integrity to avoid rejection or adversity. That's healthy. Unhealthy, you compromise your values and beliefs in order to please others or avoid conflict. So again, your values and integrity. What are your values? What are your integrity? What are those core things? And how do you stick to those, even if everyone around you disagrees, which is hard to do when a lot of times in our lives we've masked our symptoms to feel normal, to belong. And now you're asking me to stand up and not belong? Like, are you crazy? So these, and I'll include these in the notes that are coming out too. These graphs. So that's a good example of like healthy versus unhealthy boundaries. And I'm going to go over the 30 minutes of content because there's just some really cool graphics, and I could spend 2 hours on this because there's so much good stuff in here, and there's just not a lot out there on it. So we'll leave the last 15 minutes for questions versus the last 30, so I can really show you some stuff. So how do we set a boundary? So there's with boundaries, sometimes people confuse boundaries with what are called demands. And so what I want to show you first is how to set a healthy boundary. And then I want to show you the difference between boundaries and demands or like controls. So let's see. I'm going to Do a screen share again. Okay, so the text on here, this is not dyslexia friendly text. I apologize for anyone who's got dyslexia. I know this is probably hard to read, so I'm going to read it out to you. But this was the best one I could find. So this is how to set healthy boundaries. So you want to understand why they're important, why they matter, decide what you want, get clear on what you want, keep it simple, take it slow. You can start small, especially if you're setting boundaries in an environment that you haven't done that before. You might do little ones to get your confidence up before you do a big one. Set reasonable consequences, like reasonable, right? You're not going to say, and this is an example of a command. If you don't stop talking about that, then I'm gonna break up with you, right? If you don't stop talking about going out every day, every weekend to go out and go on dates, I'm going to break up with you. That's not a reasonable consequence, right? And that's also kind of a command or an ultimatum. So reasonable consequence for what the situation is. Remain consistent. This is so important. So if you set a boundary and someone keeps pushing you, the best thing you can do from my mental health training is you're just going to calmly repeat it back, right? It's kind of like you're creating this wall. So for example, if I'm setting a boundary with a friend, I mean, this is a pretend friend. I would never use real examples. But if a friend says, hey, can I borrow some money from you? And I say, hey, I don't lend money to friends. I know you're in a tough spot and I'll support you emotionally, but I don't feel comfortable loaning money. And then the next day they say, hey, could I just grab like $10? You're not gonna go, dang it, like what did I say? And not that we would do that, but say, hey, remember, I don't feel comfortable loaning money to friends. I'm sorry. And then day after day after day, and you just do the same thing. You're just saying the same thing, being consistent. It's kind of like a wall that they keep hitting and they realize like that wall's not going to move, right? So if they trigger something out of you, especially if you've been a victim of some kind of emotional abuse, narcissistic abuse, like anything like that, they might try different angles to pull emotions out of you. And so this is what they call like gray rocking, right? You're not giving anything, you're not responding, they're not triggering you, you're not saying, gosh, like you've asked me every single day. Once they get you upset or angry, now they've kind of won and they can play with that. So if you stay steady and consistent over and over again, then you're more likely to they're just going to give up. Also, if you're with somebody that doesn't have narcissism, right, or anything like that, just remaining consistent is very clear and it's very easy to follow. You want to make the focus on you. So you're not going to say, hey, if you keep doing this, I'm going to do this to you, or this is the consequence to you. You might say, hey, I know that's important to you, but if you keep bringing it up over and over again, like if you keep bringing that up over and over again, right when I come home from work, before I've had time to like recharge, I'm going to have to get up and go in the room and take some time to myself before I talk to you about it. Right. So you're just focusing on you. What is the action I'm going to take? Here's my limit. If the limit crosses, I'm going to do this thing for myself, not you have to do this or else. Right. And then communicate. So this is another thing, especially if you're not used to setting boundaries, it can be scary to set boundaries. And so sometimes we think, oh, well, they've got to know, right? So if I don't call them back or if I don't text them back right away or I leave more time, they've got to know that I'm done with the friendship. No, they might not. You need to tell them. So make sure you're communicating it. If you're a people pleaser or you don't want to hurt someone's feelings, it feels easier to draw it out or to hope they get the message so you avoid that confrontation. But what it does, it draws out like the pain and the discomfort and the stress. And so you don't want to do that. You want to be really clear with them in a kind way. And then respect and recognize other people's boundaries, So like we want to think about them as well too in a relationship, like what's going to be respectful for them. So if you take a client, for example, right, and you're going to take the weekend off to take a break, you're going to check in with them before and say, hey, I know we have a house under contract. Let's say you have a really, really anxious client. I know we have a house under contract. I know you've got a lot of anxiety right now and you reach out to me every day. And I really want to honor that. And I'm going to need to put my phone away this weekend to be with my family. And I'll call you Monday. And I want to check in with you and just see if there's anything you need before that happens. Right. So we're honoring and being respectful, but we're still taking 2 days off where we're not taking their calls. Right. So it's taking into consideration like where people are at while also still getting our needs met. So understand why it's important. Decide what you want. Keep it simple and direct. Take it slow if you need to. So little boundaries first. set reasonable consequences, remain consistent, focus on you and your behavior and your actions, not theirs. Don't try to control them, whatever. Communicate, and then recognize and respect others' boundaries. So the big thing with setting boundaries, if you set a boundary and like the best thing about boundaries is setting a boundary that has nothing to do with their behavior or not, right? So whatever they do, you're stating what you're going to do, because then you're not dependent on them, right? So if somebody is and feel free to type in the chat if you have like any situations that you want me to use or talk about. That's cool too. So if you have someone that you say like you tell them no, you're not going to say, hey, if you keep like asking me, then I'm going to like, you need to apologize to me, right? That's not a boundary. You're trying to control them. But if you say, hey, if I keep saying no and you keep asking me, I'm going to hang up the phone when you call. I'm just going to have to do that. Like when that happens, not every time, just if you keep asking me, I'm going to have to hang up the phone right now because I've asked a lot of times and it's not feeling respected. So I care about you a lot, and this is something I can't do anymore, you know? So, and also, yeah, got a good comment in there. Started dating for the first time in years and had to set a boundary, which was not met. So I broke it off. So that is really helpful when you're starting new relationships. And this is with clients too. Look for boundaries with clients. If you sit down with them during the consult, and because this is something I'm looking for when I was taking on a new client, and this was a red flag where I'd refer them out. If I said, hey, after 7 p.m. Most nights I'm with my family, and then Sunday from like 8 a.m. to 1 is when I spend time with family, or I might take Sundays off. I've done that too. I take Sundays off. Other than that, I'm available. And they say, well, what if I need this? What if I want to write an offer on Sunday? We're like, well, if you want to write an offer, I have this, or you could shoot a text. Well, I mean, what if I want to go look at houses all Sunday? And I'm like, well, we'll know that ahead of time. We're going to look at those on Saturday. Well, I don't know if I want it. Saturday's this day. Like if somebody's kind of pushing over and over again and not thinking about me at all as a client, that's a red flag. Some people need to buy a house. That's different. If they're like, well, we need to buy a house right now, we're homeless. That's very different than like you can feel the difference between someone is going to push your boundaries, because if they're like that now, they're going to be 10 times worse when they're under contract because it's stressful, right? Have you noticed that? So watch for those red flags for boundaries. It's the biggest one when you're doing consults. Do not take that client on. If they expect the world from you and you tell them, some limits and they push past that, refer that thing out because it's going to suck the life out of you. And the way that you can do that is go through the consult and say, this is how I'd always do it. I'd say, hey, this is great. And I've got a whole list and I know exactly what we need. As we're going through, I'm recognizing there's another agent in my mind that I'm thinking of like this whole time with what you're needing on the weekends and the evenings that I know is like ready to go all of those times. And I'm wondering if that might be a better fit for like your schedule. And they're really, really good. And I want the best for you because I do really care about you. Would you be open to having a conversation with them and just seeing if that's a fit too? Because I'm not going to be available those times. And I know you need that. So I'm not making them wrong. I'm not making them bad, but I'm not going to take that client because I know that they're going to push me. So watch out for the boundary pushers, because also with us, with ADHD, this is a common thing. If you've, been a victim of narcissism or anything like that, with ADHD and autism, we are more susceptible to that. We are more susceptible to emotional abuse, to gaslighting, because we forget stuff, right? We have brain fog, we have some self-worth stuff. And so people sometimes can lock onto that and kind of see us as a target or emotional abuse. That's a thing. So if you've ever experienced that, you know what I'm talking about. And so make sure that you're watching for those boundaries. If you set a boundary and it's not respected over and over again, that is not a relationship for you. That is not the person for you. Especially if you've said, hey, I want to point something out. I feel like I've set a boundary and it's kind of been stepped over multiple times. And if they say, oh gosh, I didn't even realize that, I'm sorry, then that's fine. But if you say, hey, I've set a boundary, oh, a boundary, like you mean selfish, right? That's very different. So again, it's not just you're out. It's, hey, you're bringing it to attention. And if they're doubling down and violating your boundaries and not respecting you, that's not a good situation for you. And that goes for a client, that goes for a relationship, a lot of different scenarios. So let me show you I want to show you boundaries versus demands. This is a good one. Okay, boundaries versus demands. So boundaries use I statements. They request, it's like autonomy, right? They support healthy, balanced ways of relating. They're not based on conditions, exceptions, or caveats. They're not ultimatums, right? It doesn't ask the other person to change their value, their identity, their beliefs. The intention is to aim to foster closeness. If you think being a people pleaser and hiding your boundaries makes a relationship closer, then you're wrong. Being open, honest, and then having that received is going to strengthen a relationship immediately. Have you ever had that with someone in your life where there's something that's not going right in the dynamic and it's giving you anxiety, and you finally bring it up and the other person says, "Thank you so much for telling me. I didn't know it was bothering you. What do you need from me?" How much stronger does that relationship get in about 2 seconds, right? When you know you can, and then you're going to trust the next time that happens, you're going to be able to speak up. You're going to be able to tell them, it's going to be honored. Like, that's an incredible relationship. That is what we're going for. Now, are people perfect? No. Depends on when you catch them, but they're working towards it, right? So the boundaries are designed to help you feel safe, to stop you from crossing your limit. They are related to your values or identities. Demands use you statements. It's you're trying to control them, or there's conditional or ultimatums or stipulations. It keeps you in a place of power or control. You're asking them to stifle themselves to do it anyways, right? So it's, hey, this is important to me and I need you to come with me and go to this, or I'm going to be really upset with you and not talk to you for a couple of days. That's not a boundary. That's controlling. That's demand, right? You're saying, hey, I need this. If you don't do this, here's the consequence, versus, hey, I really want you to come with me to this. It means a lot to me. I understand if you can't come. I know that I'll be upset and I'll be hurt, and I know we'll be okay. But this is really important to me, right? So you're just saying how you feel, and then they get to make their choice. If they choose not to go, But again, it's not controlling. You're not giving an ultimatum. And it's about dominance. It's fear-based loyalty. I don't think many people in here make demands. I'm sure we all do stuff on accident, but this is more if sometimes you have people that will learn therapy talk and then use it against you, right? So like, this is my boundary, right? So it sounds good because they're saying it's a boundary, but it's a demand. And then you think, well, it's their boundary. I gotta respect it. No, it's a demand, So it's also good to understand the difference between the two, so you don't get duped or manipulated or anything like that. So another thing. So here's a respectful one. I understand how busy you've been, how I feel taken for granted. You don't show up at our coffee dates without letting me know. I need to know ahead of time if you can't make it. If not, I'll need you to take a break from inviting you, right? Versus, you make me feel like our friendship means nothing when you don't show up. You have to show up or respond to me, or else our friendship's over, right? So this is an inappropriate response or consequence to them not coming to coffee. We're done with the friendship. So again, it focuses on what the needs or the feelings are versus trying to change their behavior. It respects both speakers to make your own decisions, whereas this one tries to control them or push it a certain way. It doesn't try to change the friend. It just lets them know how the behavior is affecting you and what's going to happen if the boundaries crossed, versus an ultimatum. So you can kind of get, like, one feels controlling, one is very communicative, right? So then the last thing I want to talk about is like the last main thing is boundaries with yourself. So here's the thing: we can also make boundaries with ourselves, and so every time, like, we set a boundary with ourselves and we violate that boundary, it becomes easier to violate it again. So, for example, here's an example of a boundary you might set with yourself. I'm going to go to bed at 10 because staying up every night, like, late, is making me tired and depressed, and I'm not enjoying the showings, and I don't have energy to work out anymore, whatever. So I really want to uphold that with myself, because I need to go to bed at 10. And then 10 o'clock comes and you break that boundary. That's a boundary. Like, there's a reason for it, right? And it like makes sense, and it's realistic, and it's got a good reason. So every time you set that kind of boundary with yourself and you break it, it's easier the next time to do that. And so that's been helpful for people to remind themselves. So you might have some boundaries with yourself that you really want to focus on upholding. A boundary with yourself. Don't do this. I'm going to do 5 miles of running, then read 10 pages. I got all these boundaries with myself, and then you don't do them, and then you feel terrible, right? So don't set all these, they're not quote unquote boundaries, right? A boundary is something that's like violates your well being, not like some goal you have that now you're going to feel crappy if you don't uphold, if you don't have the discipline. Does that make sense? So like have boundaries with yourself that are really about your own self care on a deep level, not goals or activities to be more successful. Those aren't boundaries. Those are intentions. Those are goals. They're not boundaries. So having boundaries with yourself, I'm going to at least eat 2 solid meals a day because I haven't been eating enough. And that's really important for me because I was feeling tired and sick and I've been having heart stuff or something. Like that's a boundary, right? It's your well-being. And if you don't do it, your well-being is going to suffer on a deep level. That's what I would think of with ourselves. And so it's really important to differentiate those and really put priority to the boundaries with ourselves versus like the goals. And so that's what I want to throw out there too. So again, when you're in spaces, if you start to feel uncomfortable, if you start to hit your limit, that's a good indicator that might be time to set a boundary, and then you can communicate that, and then you'll feel better. You'll be able to do things that you really want to do and feel more at peace, have less resentment, and it's going to be a good thing. So that's what I have on boundaries. So let me know if you need anything, if you have any questions, and yeah, have a wonderful holiday break. So we'll talk to you next time. Thank you, everybody. All right, have a good one.